In today's episode of Audit Austin Code Compliance, I'd like to introduce you to Elaine Garrett. She is a division manager for the Austin Code Department. What you don't see in this photo, it's kind of a poor photo, I had to blow it up, is all the little gold stars that she wears on her collars, much like a police detective or things like that, which indicates her rank at the Austin Code Department. Let's learn a little bit about Miss Garrett's history. On a website called Law Officer Connect, we found some information about Miss Garrett. There's no photo here, but we know it's our right person, and I'll show you that in a second. What state do you work in? It's Texas. My training, commissioned as a peace officer in 1976, Austin, Texas. Left with over 2,400 hours of training. Hold a master's in peace officer certification, instructor certification, multiple defense tactics certifications, firearms instructor, ASP and taser instructor, served as a cadet instructor for 7 years. Upon retirement, she still holds a commission as a reserved officer in Williamson County. She does instruction at local constable and county departments, currently in charge of training and management of Code Enforcement Department, City of Austin, have been since 2008. Bingo, this is our gal. So we can see that Elaine is somebody who has lots of training as a law enforcement officer, left that field, retired, came to work for Austin Code in 2008. That's not an uncommon thing for code people to do, to find a second career. There's nothing wrong with that, but think about her background when we start going through this thing today, and let's see if she's going to be telling the truth. Now, as a matter of public record, anybody can look up anybody's salary, and here we have Miss Elaine Marie Garrett, who is a division manager from the Austin Code Department. She's Hispanic. Hire date was 1/22 of 2008. That matches what we just learned. She's female, of course, and she makes $87,194 as a base salary. Again, part of Elaine's duties is to attend community town hall meetings and things like this. And you can see that she'll sit on a panel with police and EMS and other folks and answer questions about code. Okay, I found this cartoon online and it seems very appropriate here. This could very easily be Carl Smart. Carl Smart creates little generals like Elaine and Paul. When you look at how we dress up our code compliance employees, we dress them up much similar to a law enforcement agency. And in our division managers, we put little gold stars on them. This cartoon says it all. If you're good and you follow the direction of your director, you get gold stars, you get promotions, and if you don't follow directions, you get put into a corner. So this is City Hall, and just the other day, Miss Garrett spoke at City Hall to the Public Safety Commission members about some code cases at Grant Street. And while she was only allowed to speak for about 1 minute and 30 seconds, let's look at her testimony, her presentation, and let's imagine that we could plug in the events of the old movie with Jim Carrey called Liar, Liar, where somebody cannot lie, where they're forced to tell the truth. Let's look at this presentation under the auspice of Liar, Liar. Perhaps Miss Garrett should have started off her introduction to counsel like this. Counsel, you heard from Carrie Sylvie about her properties, and she is absolutely correct. Citywide, we have a problem with neighbors turning in other neighbors, but we actually encourage that so we can zip our numbers up. And this is exactly what happened to Mr. Ganache on his property with all of these violations. It's best described by this short clip from the old show Bewitched.
What's the matter with you? All of a sudden I'm married to a peeping Tom. Spying on people, sticking your nose in everybody's business. Go back to bed. You ought to be ashamed of yourself.
So we're going to go ahead and dive right into it, and let me show you about Mr. Ganache's case.
Okay, my name's Elaine Garrett, and I'm just going to kind of review what you see there. I know we're on limited on time. It's at 3606 Grant, we've had 14 total complaints. Violations range from the unscreened RV to property abatement, which is unsanitary conditions, to electrical wiring and land use, which requires building permits.
Okay, let's take these one at a time. This is 3606 Grant Street, and she's told you there's 14 complaints. This is a video that is being shown to the Public Safety Committee. There are 2 city council members on the stand. Elaine Garrett has her chance to tell the story. So she claims the first violation was an unscreened RV on vacant lot. Accessory uses for principal residence use, and gives a section. Okay, so let's see what that one was all about. So, council members, as I cannot tell a lie, let me walk you through exactly what happened here. I've got some case files put in a chronological order. Let's start with the case log from the inspector. Here you can see a City of Austin Code Department case log ending in 7713. The address is 3604 Grant. You can see the owner is Mr. Panaki. The citizen complaint was an empty lot. Citizens think they may be getting ready to sell camper trailers from the lot, and it has been cleared, and he dumps brush at the end of the cul-de-sac. Again, this is the nosy neighbor who is doing anything she can to create problems, but that's okay. We're going to send an inspector out. The inspector checked TCAD for the owner. They've realized that this is not 3604. It is part of 3606. It's been added to the homeowner's lot. This isn't an empty lot. This is essentially a side yard. So Mr. Gonzalez, Luis Gonzalez, went to the property on 2-2 and states he observed 2 mobile homes on this lot. There was nobody home to speak about these structures, and so he took photos. Let's take a quick look. Now, again, there was nobody home nobody to speak to, and so here's our case photos from 2-2. Here you can see from the case photos from the inspector's file that the inspector, even though he stated nobody was home, he trespassed onto the property and took up-close photos of what he claims are 2 mobile homes, but that are actually RVs. Here you can see these are up-close shots. You can see one of them is for sale. Here's the shot. You can clearly see that these are 2 RVs parked on a property. And even though I've told you in my my talk here that these are unscreened RVs, our investigator decided to classify these as mobile homes. So let's continue to look at the case log. So it becomes very clear here that we dropped the ball on this one. What we have is 2 RVs. Our inspector classified them as mobile homes because he wanted to screw with this guy, or he's not trained. We haven't decided which one it is at this point. We sent a notice of violation. Let's go ahead and take a look at that notice of violation. We sent a notice of violation out 4 days later. Here's the notice of violation we sent to Mr. Ganache on February the 6th. Even though they were clearly RVs, our inspector decided to send this thing out as if they were mobile homes. We never admit any mistakes. And so here we cite him with section 25-1207 of the Land Development Code. It clearly states a person may not place, maintain, or occupy a mobile home in the city other than in a mobile home park that is licensed under this division or in a mobile home subdivision. We say the date was February 2nd, and we want him to discontinue the use of these mobile homes. Although we clearly know they are RVs, we're going to screw with this guy. Over the course of time, we convince him that we're going to take him to court, so he sells one of the RVs and has the other RV right here. We came on site with permission on this date to take a picture, checking on his progress. And then we came back on 3/18 and photographed that both of the RVs, which we classified as mobile homes, have been sold and removed from the property. So our investigator was successful in having this homeowner sell his RVs, even though I told you it was a case of being unscreened. One thing you're not going to see in our case logs is an email from this owner from May 11th of 2015, where he actually writes Robert Alvarado and Mr. Gonzalez and he talks about the RV issue. We acknowledge that Mr. Ganache showed us the titles, but we went ahead and branded them as mobile homes anyway. One of the interesting things about this is Mr. Ganache states that he handed our inspector a detailed letter of protest along with the copies of the titles for the RV, and that our inspector promised to electronically file them, but we never do that. We always want to show one side of the case. Again, Mr. Ganache is showing an example of other mobile homes in the area, but again, that would make us look bad, so we don't address anything like that. The second item in my report that talks about property abatement, but in order to keep our timeline straight, let me share with you an email that this homeowner, Mr. Ganache, sent to our director, Carl Smart, wherein he says, "Hello, Mr. Smart, I would like to show you proof of certain activities in your department. Tickets," again, this is a language barrier, he's referring to code cases, "are being closed without compliance because people know city people who need to be paid, and I can show you proof in your own system. My only fault is I am refusing to bribe. I would rather go to jail than bribe. I was warned again today by code compliance officer, and I have a ticket," which I believe is a citation. "I know this to be true because I've been told by citizens who are paying it. Regards, Pinocchio." This is on May the 7th. Of course, we don't put up with that. And so on May the 8th, we open a code compliance case. And the complainant is the next door neighbor. And she states that the property owner continues to violate city ordinances, buckets of water, rubbish, parks cars in vacant lot, even though we know that this isn't a vacant lot, that this is all one lot now. We're going to let her do this because it increases our caseloads. This is one of the few times that we actually document that we got permission to come on to the property. It's interesting that our investigator here says that while he was investigating, a female voice disputed the lack of water in the white buckets. And she claimed that Mr. Pinocchio empties the buckets. We're talking about a compost bin, okay? A compost pile. One interesting thing that our investigator here identifies, he says he spoke to Miss Bridget Wilson at length and advised her that the incoming calls coming in as complaints were anonymous. Unfortunately, he just put her name right here in the body of the case log, which is a public document. They discussed the fact that Mr. Pinocchio had concerns about some of her items, but that he wasn't going to investigate because of a large dog that was upset with his presence. We're going to go ahead and just not mess with her because she's jacking up our case logs and making us look good. There's a small pile of shrubs over by the street ready for pickup. Again, this complaint, I observed a pile of compost materials near the west fence and were only bordered by tree limbs. The city does not regulate how a compost bin is constructed. You don't have to have a big bin. So this guy had some tree limbs on the ground, and even though the inspector says he couldn't detect any odor from the compost pile, he did observe some eggshells. But we're not going to let this guy off, so we're going to tell him that he has to move his compost bin, that it has to be at least 25 feet from a property used or zoned as a residential use. Of course, we don't have any documentation for that, but he doesn't know that, so we're going to make him do that. Again, Mr. Gonzalez, the inspector, spoke with Bridget Wilson, and again, now he's given her phone number, that her husband, Adam Wilson, is in contact with Carl Smart. So here we see some backdoor dealings going on here about Mr. Ganache. She's actually talking to APD officers about things. And so you can see that we're really working with all kinds of agencies to try to get Mr. Ganache in line, because we will not tolerate somebody accusing our people of taking a bribe. The other thing we want to do is we want to attack these 3 decks, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit later. So again, that basically covers the compost pile. Was not odorous or anything like that, but we're going to go ahead and write this guy up for his compost pile. Let's get on to number 3. So again, number 3, we're going to talk about electrical wiring on 5/8. He observed an extension cord. Our investigator observed an extension cord leading from the house to an adjacent tree where Mr. Gosh has mounted a camera. Again, this camera was because code inspectors kept coming on to the property. The extension cord is not permanent and is plugged into an outlet. Okay? And again, the extension cord is not a violation according to Mr. Gonzalez. But let's look and see what happens next. So even though Mr. Gonzalez said that it was not a violation, we're going to go ahead and send out a notice of violation on May the 29th. And again, this is very well covered underneath another video that Mr. Flatt has put out called Ross Dickens, the danger zone. And the reason that's done is because Mr. Ross Dickens is a code inspector trainee, although we're going to allow him to be called himself an officer. But let's stick to the thing. Let's talk about the wiring. We're going to write him up for a structural maintenance, which is really not a structural. We're going to cite section 605.4, and this is exactly what I did in my presentation, but that is not accurate. It's a poor reference. It should read the Land Development Code 25-12-213, section 605.4 of that with wiring. And again, we're going to cite this even though our previous inspector stated that it wasn't permanent wiring. We're going to screw this guy. Of course, our rookie calls it an extinction cord. Can't spell, but that's okay. We're going to do this. We're going to give him 20 days to take down that extension cord because simply we don't want any proof of our inspectors coming on the property, so that camera needs to come down, even though I classified it to you a few minutes ago as a light. And then the last one was land use building permit required, and it's going to be a deck. Let's look at something here real quick. Our city code has lots of definitions in it, and a deck defined by 2512-13, the local amendments to the building code. Under section 202 is our definitions. The definition of a deck by the code is an exterior floor supported on at least 2 opposing sides by an adjacent structure and or post, piers, or other independent supports. So please visualize a deck coming off your back porch. It's supported on 2 opposing sides. One side may be the home. The other side would be a post, pier, or other independent supports. This is the definition of a deck. And so it's exactly what you thought it would be. But we're going to go ahead and say that this guy's got a deck. Now, again, the neighbor, Miss Wilson, has turned him in for no silt fencing, protected trees not covered and fenced, land altering, curb not filled in, deck with no permit. Okay? But we get a complaint and we have to go out. And so Mr. Gonzalez has been out there, but at this point, Mr. Gonzalez has been accused of taking bribes. So we're going to send out Mr. Ross Dickens. And Mr. Ross Dickens is going to speak with Supervisor Alvarado. Be a good idea to meet an environmental inspector at the location. So we decided we're going to send the city environmental out. But we don't coordinate that very well. So the inspector comes out without us being present. And we take photos. Mr. Panaki was a little upset, but not hostile. And he understands the reason for showing up, because if somebody puts in a case log, then we have to respond. That's okay, because that makes our numbers look big. In fact, Mr. Ross writes Panaki a letter and says, "Let me start by saying thank you for being able to meet me today on your property. I can more than understand your frustrations. Code coming to your home. Like to thank you for understanding that once a complaint is made, yada. He said that when he was at the property today, he saw no visible signs for code to be concerned at this point. Probably at one point this guy understands, but he doesn't have any stars on his collar yet, so we'll get him up to speed." And so the fact is that we actually did write this guy up for a deck, and you'll see it here. This is that notice of violation that Code Inspector Trainee Ross Dickens did. This is the structural maintenance. And here we write him up for land use, building a deck 3 decks totaling 384 square feet of platform. He didn't have permission to go measure those things, but that's okay. We're going to call it a deck, even though it's not a deck, because we're not going to tolerate somebody accusing any of our people of taking bribes. Okay, so as you've seen, Elaine Garrett does not understand the legal definition of a deck as by city code, the same code that she's trying to enforce. This isn't a deck. It's not attached to a structure. It is not supported by any post. It is a platform on the ground. There are no regulations for a platform on the ground. It exceeded 200 square feet, but they forced Mr. Gosh to cut this thing down so where it was under 200 square feet, or else they were going to take him to court. He was going to have to hire a lawyer and face fines of $2,000 a day. It is ignorance, it is incompetence for a code investigator and for a division manager to come after somebody for something like this. So in summary, Miss Garrett has done a 1 minute and 30-second presentation to City Council and made this homeowner look like he was a bad, bad man, and that they got out there, did their job, and now everything is good. So there's really no problem. So our star for the day is Elaine Garrett. You've seen through the magic of video, we've described the code cases that she presented to the Public Safety Committee. And of course, it took us a little bit more than 1 minute and 30 seconds to tell you the truth. This was all done with the magic of liar, liar. But there's no doubt that Elaine Garrett has a long history of law enforcement and that she works for the City Code Department, but she basically lied to the City Council. She presented something totally out of context, presented it in a short format in such a way that it made them look like they were doing the correct and proper job. Is this the kind of person, more importantly, is this the kind of department that the citizens of Austin deserve when you have experienced law enforcement officers running the show and fabricating evidence, basically, and twisting the facts to make it look like they're doing a great job, when in fact, they violate people's constitutional rights every day? This is a problem. So in keeping with the tradition of the city of Austin, let's give Miss Garrett another star for storytelling and reading. Way to go, Elaine.